Here, I don't have a gavel, so it's a matter of me following the time prescriptions that have been given here, because I know they're quite strict on use of these rooms. So I've been given 8 minutes, but we're already 5 minutes in, so that means I speak to you for 3 minutes. So let me just put my stopwatch on so I can control the people that are on the panel. You've all got 5 minutes each to speak. And look, what I'll do first, if you don't mind, is just give you an idea of where the community solution action emanated from, what their purpose is. Shouldn't the panelists be sitting up here, or no? Yes. Whatever you feel comfortable. Come on up. So, what are the communities of ocean action? Where do they come from? You know, what's the purpose of it? You know, I am a bureaucrat, but I do hate creating more bureaucracy. I'd much rather be chopping it out. But there's a reason for these communities of ocean action. And I can speak with experience because I was kind of the prime mover and prime organizer of the first UN Ocean Conference. And what we did 2 years before that came into existence, and remember we were inventing the wheel at that stage, was we formed these things called informal preparatory working groups. I mean, how is that for a bureaucratic expression? And didn't really realize how important they were going to become, otherwise we would have come up with a much sexier name. But it was basically getting together all the relevant departments, the relevant UN agencies, but also bringing in, you know, IUCN, WWF, and others who were going to be necessary to be part of a successful conference. Banged heads together. There was a lot of head banging in the first 6 months, a lot of doubts, but by the 6 months in, people started realizing, wow, these are great working groups. And we split them into the various areas that mattered to SDG 14, like fisheries and coastal ecosystems, that sort of thing. So suddenly people were mixing with others that they didn't normally mix with on a subject of common interest. So they proved to be the bedrock for the partnership dialogues. Those of you who were at the Ocean Conference will remember that those partnership dialogues were the kind of bedrock, well, the heart and soul of the first UN Ocean Conference. You had the partnership dialogue outcomes, you had the negotiated call for action document, which came from all the member states, and you had the voluntary commitments. Those were the three big outcomes of the conference, the nearly 1,500 voluntary commitments coming out of that conference. So when it came to the designing the second UN Ocean Conference, and by the way, you know, that is not yet mandated. That's up to member states, obviously, to mandate it because it's a UN conference. It has to be mandated by United Nations member states. But we've been working on this for a year now, and I have absolutely 100% confidence that it will be mandated pretty soon, and that we're going to have to shift into preparing for that second UN Ocean Conference, which will be held in the first week of June in Lisbon, co-hosted by the governments of Kenya and Portugal. So, gird your loins. And part of the girding of the loins is the communities of ocean action, which are based on what I told you before, those informal preparatory working groups. There are 9 of them. They are broken down into basically a combination of the targets of SDG 14 and a breakdown of the 1478 voluntary commitments, breaking those down into obvious areas, you know, like science, ocean science, fisheries, coastal ecosystems, ocean acidification, etc. So there are 9 of them, and each of them are led by co-focal points, and people like IUCN, people like IOC, I'm sure you're familiar with these acronyms, and who are represented, some of them, here on the podium with me today. So I think I've talked enough in terms of the background to these, and I just would conclude by saying that, first of all, I'm really, really grateful for the co-focal points that have done so much to get us to where we already are with the work of the communities of ocean action. They've done a tremendous job over the last year, but that is going to double down in 2019 because, as I say, they're going to be the bedrock for the 22nd UN Ocean Conference in terms of telling us what the problems are and the solutions are in their particular areas, telling us who the best speakers and panelists will be for the second Ocean Conference. The communities of ocean action are the go-to groups for their areas of competence. That's why they are so important in terms of the UN Ocean Conference system. So that is work which lies before us in 2019. So I'm going to first of all go to the Community of Ocean Action on Marine Pollution. You'll recall there's a SDG 14 target which matures in 2025 on marine pollution. And I'm going to ask Susan Ruffer to tell us a little bit about the Community of Ocean Action, which Ocean Conservancy and IMO are the co-focal points of.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador Thomson, for your leadership on all of this, and thank you, everybody here. On behalf of Andreas Merkel, who's been leading the focal point and working with him from Ocean Conservancy, I just want to say that we are very proud to be part of this community. This is an incredibly timely and important issue, as I'm sure you all know. You can't go a day almost without seeing some news about marine pollution. And it shows in the commitments. There was a huge response to the conference. There are approximately 600 commitments made in the marine pollution space. So that number's growing. We encourage more. So for those of you who maybe aren't part of that community yet, we'd love to have you. And that's really a place to share information, solutions. Is that me? Information, solutions, ideas. So we've been hosting webinars. We've been bringing some of the top scientists on marine pollution to share some of their work, people like Dr. Jenna Jambak, and we encourage suggestions for other things that might be useful for the community. And I think it's a question of, why talk about this here? This is a climate COP. And I think it's a good question, but I think there are really good answers. These are two of the most critical threats to the ocean. I mean, I think you've got all the threats to the ocean basically represented here. These are, incredible threats to the ocean, and they all need urgent and ambitious action. So, first of all, those of us in the ocean community absolutely are cheering on, encouraging, supporting everyone here who's trying to do something ambitious on climate, because that is critical for the health of the ocean. And we know that this is one system, so these threats are related. We know that to have a healthy ocean, we have to do something about climate change. We also know, as ocean people, that you can't actually have a healthy climate without a healthy ocean. And that's part of the idea behind tackling also the plastic pollution and all of these other threats. The ocean, as I'm sure most of you know, has absorbed 93% of the heat, about 30% of the carbon, about 40% of the world's population lives within 100 kilometers of the coast. About 3 billion people rely on the ocean for their primary sources of protein. This is no joke. This is an important part of our globe, our human systems, our natural systems, and our climate systems. So a healthy and resilient ocean is necessary in order for us to deal with climate change. We know that the ocean cannot be resilient if there's as much plastic as fish in the ocean, which is what some of the experts are predicting for 2050. So that's not that far away. At the same time, the solutions are complex and interrelated. And so as we think about how we solve an ocean problem or an ocean pollution problem, we need to consider some of the trade-offs. So for example, when you look at different materials that you might use, if you're not going to use plastic packaging, you might use glass or paper or wood or bio-based plastics. What does that mean for things like land use? And what does that mean for things like deforestation? What does it mean for things like transportation and the greenhouse gas emissions that you put out for transportation? What does it mean for how you produce all of those materials? So when we think about these solutions, we also need to be careful to think across them so that we're not actually creating problems in one area as we solve them in another. We can also leverage those solutions. One of the biggest solutions to the marine plastic problem is actually dealing with waste management. Waste management also has a huge component for dealing with greenhouse gases. If you think about methane that's produced in landfills, if we could solve waste management problems, particularly in developing countries, so that we're sorting out organics, we're composting them, and we're also taking care of those plastics, we're basically leveraging two solutions and making a big difference to the ocean. The last thing I will say, and maybe this is a very US view, is the plastic pollution issue is a bipartisan issue. It's a universal issue. There is no one who thinks that plastic pollution is not in the ocean. It's pretty obvious that it is. There's no one who believes that it should be in the ocean. Everyone believes that it should not be in the ocean. It should not be in the environment. And so we may differ on the solutions that we propose for that, depending on where we sit, but there is unified action and unified agreement that we need to do something about this problem. As you know, in the US, that is not true on climate change. And so I think the fact that we are able to bring the private sector, academics, NGOs, governments to the table to have a constructive conversation on this issue has been very instructive. And just as one example, in the US, President Trump recently signed the Save Our Seas Act to deal with marine pollution, which was passed in Congress by unanimous consent. That is a very big deal in today's America. So I think there are things that we can learn from how that solution is playing out in the US and things that we have to be careful of to make sure that we don't create a political divide. So thank you again and welcome you all to the community.
Thanks very much, Susan, and thanks for the fantastic work that you've been doing to date. You might wonder how the communities of ocean action actually meet. Well, I'm thinking back to a great meeting that we did through a global webinar, which Ocean Conservancy arranged, and what was the lady's name from? Jenna Jambak, who's probably the world authority on plastic marine pollution. She gave us a fantastic presentation. So, you become part of these communities of ocean action, you become part of a global community which gets together by way of webinars and virtual communication. But we are also, as you'll hear, talking about having actual meetings. As indeed we did for the Mangroves Community of Ocean Action when we were in the Ramsar Convention in Dubai recently. Packed room of 200 people. So the virtual meetings being supplemented by actual meetings as well. I wanted now to introduce Dr. Manuel Barrange, who's the Director of Fisheries of FAO. FAO and UNDP lead up the Community of Ocean Action on fisheries. Manuel.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you for the introduction, and a pleasure to be here. And yes, we deal with Community of Action number 9 on fisheries sustainability. And let me start with perhaps a poetic nature. One of my favorite quotes is from Mark Twain, which said that in the life of a man, there's only two dates that matter. First is the day that you're born, and second, the day that you realize why. And I think in the Community of Actions, we know what the day that it was born. It was born in the UN Oceans Conference. I met a twinkle in Ambassador Thomson's eye. We're still to realize the why as a community. Why? Because it is growing. It is growing as a process. At the moment we're in the process, and we have to see at some point, we hope that we will realize why it was created, because there's so much emphasis and so much effort put together that needed coordination. So fisheries sustainability is my bread and butter. This is what I do every day from 8 in the morning to about 7 in the evening. So it's very natural for us, for FAO, to focus on the sustainable fisheries community of action. I can give you a few figures because I love figures. So of the 1,470, 1,400 commitments, about 500 of those refer to sustainable fisheries, because it's something that people immediately mention when they talk about oceans. Always, everyone has an opinion on fisheries, and fisheries is in everyone's mind. Of these 500 commitments, these are provided by about 450 different organizations, so it's a very broad spectrum of organizations, as I'll tell you in a moment. And we coordinate that with the UNDP. In total, there are about $18.2 billion committed under Community of Action number 9. So it's a fantastic figure, of course, 18.2 billion, of which 7 billion come from commitments from governments. That's the biggest contributor, the governments themselves, which is a great thing, because you can take governments to task. 9 billion come from international intergovernmental organizations. So that's the second, or the biggest actually, of the contributors, international organizations, intergovernmental organizations. NGOs only 0.6 billion, which is not only 600,000, which is not a small amount. Private sector, 70 million. and so on and so forth. And then it's a law of diminishing returns. What is quite important is that is a variety of organization types that are focusing on commitments towards sustainability of fisheries, and that is actually very good. In terms of the commitments geographically, there are 164 global commitments to get an idea of the numbers, and there's about 100 commitments per ocean basin, you know, for all oceans. The only two that have a very small number of commitments are Arctic and Southern Ocean, because when it comes to fisheries, they are obviously less important, and in the case of the Arctic, there's a moratorium. So, but you can see that it's actually very, very broad in terms of the areas of where the commitments are made, the institutions that have committed the money, and the volume overall is quite significant. About 2/3 of these commitments are due in 2030, and about 1/3 in 2020. So we have work to do in terms of chasing those commitments, because this is really the difficult bit. You know, it's all very easy to stand, or reasonably easy to stand in front of a microphone and say, you know, I'm going to pledge this, but then how you make it happen. One important date for you to keep in mind, because for us it's very important in terms of sustainability of fisheries and how to bring those commitments into some sort of logic. In almost exactly a year's time, in November 2019, we will have an international conference in FAO on fishery sustainability, trying to make sure that we have the information, the data to clarify the set of fisheries, globally, regionally, what is fisheries for, what are the trade-offs involved, and that will form essentially a vision of fisheries for the 21st century that we hope to bring then to the next Oceans Conference, UN Nations Conference, and that will be linked then with these commitments, because they all should be together. The money should chase the vision should chase the money, they should be go together, and maybe at that point we will know why the community of actions were created. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mano. SDG 14.4, SDG 14.6 both mature in 2020. You can see why that community of ocean action is so important. It's about fisheries, both of those SDG targets. Some of you are probably wondering how you make a voluntary commitment and become a member of the community of ocean action, because if you have made a voluntary commitment, you're automatically on their books as a member. Answer is go to the website oceanconference.un.org. One word, oceanconference.un.org, and you'll find out how you can make a voluntary commitment. It'll take you 20 minutes to do it, and you're in. So moving on to another target that matures in 2020, SDG 14.2 on better management of coastal and marine ecosystems. The COA on that one is led by Nature Conservancy and who else, Tamara? Sorry? And the CBD Secretariat. So we're very lucky to have with us here Tamara Thomas, who's the Ocean Policy Advisor for Nature Conservancy, and she's going to tell us about the work of that community of ocean action.
Thank you. We put together some slides, so I'll stand over here so I can operate the computer. But I can start now. So the marine and coastal ecosystem management community of ocean action focuses on area-based management tools that have successfully been used to sustainably manage, conserve, protect, and restore marine ecosystems. Okay. Sorry, I was a bit blinded by that light, so I can't see my notes. And we just want to emphasize that we focus on the ecosystem approach and consider the consideration of representative networks when we're talking about area-based management tools. such as marine spatial planning, integrated coastal zone management, establishment of marine protected areas. And the main purpose of these, of course, is to sustainably manage, protect, conserve, and restore coastal and marine areas and resources, including underwater cultural heritage, ensuring important social impacts, while also supporting environmentally sustainable economic activities. So for our community of ocean action, we're up now to over 800 voluntary commitments. And more than 130 of these voluntary commitments relate to marine protected areas. And over 30 of these commitments include marine spatial planning. Large marine ecosystems feature in about 20 of these commitments. Good. Sure. Sorry, maybe it would have been easier if we didn't have slides. So, yeah, right now we're up to over 800 of these commitments. And I wanted to highlight today, since we're at UNFCCC, some voluntary commitments that actually focus on adaptation and mitigation. And so here we have one that understands and assesses the impacts of, actually I'm gonna come over here and maybe ask if someone can just conduct this. Thank you. So yes, here we see one of the voluntary commitments that focuses on understanding and assessing impacts. The next voluntary commitment monitors different aspects, so you can change the slide, of climate change and its impacts on ocean biodiversity. Following this one, we have one that uses local observations and knowledge for monitoring. And then after this, we have one that, well, actually this is not yet a voluntary commitment, but as Peter Thomson was just saying, it's time to register your voluntary commitments, and so this is one that will be registered as a voluntary commitment. And it's understanding and assessing the role in climate mitigation and adaptation. And it's a map that I think my colleague from IUCN will talk about after. And then we have another voluntary commitment that focuses on strengthening resilience, which is one from TNC that focuses on coasts and insurance. The next one focuses on the rehabilitation of marine systems degraded by climate change. And we have another one that talks about the restoration using green approaches. And then finally, we have one on adaptation to climate change, including adaptation of coastal infrastructure. So here we can see that our community of ocean action is definitely addressing some of the issues that are prevalent and talked about at UNFCCC. So next, on behalf of CBD, I'd just like to give a few words. At the CBD COP 2014 in Egypt this year, which a few of us just came from, CBD parties agreed to the process to develop the post-2020 biodiversity framework as the follow-up to the Aichi biodiversity targets, which will end in 2020. This process lays out a pathway for detailed deliberations and input by governments, intergovernmental organizations, NGOs, indigenous peoples, and local communities and other stakeholders. This process will culminate at CBD COP in China in 2020, where the COP will aim to agree upon and establish the post-2020 biodiversity framework in the context of the 2050 vision of strategic plan for biodiversity. Oh, we can keep moving. Thank you. And so as we can see, there are a lot of alignments with the SDGs in the Aichi targets, and a lot of focus this year at the CBD was given to the ocean. So one of the main things that happened this year was called Ocean Voices, and this happened on the margins of COP24 in December. It brought together over 140 participants and provided a unique forum to share stories conveying various voices of the ocean in a creative and inspired manner. Ocean stakeholders from different sectors and experiences came together and highlighted solutions to address the challenges facing marine and coastal biodiversity in line with the 2050 vision for biodiversity. So we wanted to let you know that Ocean Voices, here you can see a connection with SDG 14, and Ocean Voices plans to remain a platform to engage different ocean stakeholders, including the communities of ocean action, in the process to develop an ambitious and achievable post-2020 biodiversity framework. And next we have an in-person meeting that will be in Montreal, Canada in the spring of 2019. And we hope to see many of you all there. And we thank the Swedish government for some funding there. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Tamara. You can see from Tamara's presentation another aspect of the Communities of Ocean Action, which is in their communities, in their families, that they're trading knowledge with each other, they're helping each other with the implementation of their voluntary commitments. And in regard to implementation of the voluntary commitments, first of all, you'll be wondering what's the value of these voluntary commitments. Well, the good news is they are being implemented. We get the feedback we're getting from the Communities of Ocean Action, initial assessments, is they are being implemented, which stands to reason. You wouldn't make a voluntary commitment if you weren't intending to do it. But it's going to be a very important part in the approach, of course, to the Lisbon conference for us to be able to demonstrate the difference that these voluntary commitments have been made. And DESA will be hiring a consultant who will be putting together a report which will capture all the work of the Communities of Ocean Action and the implementation of those voluntary commitments. Now, our next speaker is from the Community of Ocean Action on mangroves. We have one on coral, we have one on mangroves, and of course they relate closely, or will do when we get to Lisbon, to the Marine and Coastal Ecosystems Management COA. Anyway, Ali Raza Rizvi is from IUCN, and IUCN co-hosts with Ramsar, World Ramsar Convention Secretariat, the Mangroves Community of Ocean Action. So, Ali, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador.
Yeah, please.
First of all, I must say that it was very innovative, I think, step to involve all the, global communities and other to work on this. So congratulations on that. And initially, when Ramsar and IUCN, we got that, would say, okay, how would we go forward? But again, within few, I think, weeks after talking to each other, talking to other community of action, we started moving quite well now. And mangroves overall have always remained marginalized. Everybody talks about them, but it's very difficult, and still, over 1% global rates of deforestation going on, and in Southeast Asia, where the most mangroves are, 2% of the mangroves degradation going on. So that's a lot of that, and when we talk about all the benefits of mangroves, so it's needed that action is also followed. It's not just that. So this is a really good step where we are quite proud working together with Ramsar, contributing towards SDG 14, and because of mangroves, they are all interrelated with coral reefs, with seagrass, livelihoods, mitigation, adaptation, all this. So they can be really good ecosystems. If we invest into those, there could be multiple benefits. So that's how we are trying to go forward on it. So I will in about few minutes, we'll just share where we are at the moment. But the key is we all need to, step up and move forward more on mangroves, not just talking about mangroves, but implementation. So currently we are, maybe the third one, next please. We have 116, so you can see that still a lot of work needs to be done in this But when we started, it was very low, 74, and now we have moved up in the last 6 months or so. And out of these, it's good to see that Asia Pacific is in the forefront, and 40% of these, pledges and commitments are coming from there. So that's good to see. Overall, Fiji is taking a lead, so that must be because of your leadership. 8 they are from there, and then Sri Lanka and some other country also following up. And Sri Lanka, by the way, is the first country which has declared all its mangroves as protected areas. So that's again an example to be followed by others, because restoration is one thing, but protection is the key. If we can have management and all this, then we can perhaps have good steps over that. And if we look at overall stakeholder participation, you can see NGOs, civil society, they are taking the lead in these commitments, followed by the states. And end of the day, the mandate for mangrove restoration, it's with the states. So that's critical, because otherwise all those pledges which are coming may not be realized unless and until the states have this ownership and they move forward. And among the states, there are over 24 of, in every country, agencies who have the mandate for coastal, other areas and mangroves. Sometimes the revenue department holds the land, tree belongs to the forest department. So it's very challenging, but we have the resolve that if we can work together, we can have these barriers crossed together. And overall, SDG 14, these commitments, 72% of the commitments are directly contributing towards coastal marine protected areas, and different targets you can see can be achieved if we invest into these mangrove areas. And then overall, 60% of the commitments, when we did the analysis, they are directly contributing towards climate change. So it's very much related to the topic and all the challenges we are discussing during this COP. So one entry point could be towards going through mangroves and these commitments to be realized. And again, please do join. As Ambassador said, it's very easy. It takes 10 to 15 minutes. DASA is providing that space, and if we can just go over there if you have not pledged to mangroves, and we are ready to work with you towards that end. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Ali. I come from a mangrove coast, and I would love to see mangroves replace the panda as the symbol in the world of looking after nature, because they really are the bunkers of biodiversity for our planet, the mangroves. So thank you for the work that you're doing on that. And planting a mangrove sapling, any idiot like me can do it, and that's why it's so appealing, the mangrove replanting scheme. It's like beach cleanup. If you can't do that, well, you're a waste of space if you can't plant a mangrove or pick up the rubbish off the beach. So that leads me to the final panelist, who is Kirsten SNC, who's from IOC UNESCO. Those of you who don't know IOC UNESCO, that is in the UN system, our repository of scientific knowledge on the ocean. And they have a huge responsibility coming up, of course, with the Ocean Decade, where we're going to take this enormous step forward, where humanity will finally understand what we've got out there in the ocean. So you've got a big responsibility to IOC. And you guys head up along with who? IOC? Sorry? Jeff. Okay, so Jeff, the Global Environment Fund, and IOC head up the Committed to Ocean Action on Scientific Knowledge, Technology Transfer.
Exactly. Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure. I'm here representing Vladimir Ryabinin, the Executive Secretary of IOC, and of course the Community of Ocean Action for Scientific Knowledge, which we all hear always that science is the basis for action and for ocean action. And so we, in our Community of Ocean Action, we have more than 500 commitments, I think. It's a very diverse community as well, because a lot of submissions also tick like, oh yeah, actually we are doing that, we are protecting the mangroves, and we are also increasing scientific knowledge. So it's a very broad, and that the voluntary commitments which are solely focusing on scientific knowledge are not that many. However, it's the variety which also makes it so fruitful, I think, and also so powerful, because if we look now at ocean science, 80% of the ocean science output is produced by 20 countries. And those are not the 20 countries which will be affected by climate change the most. They have the capacity, the adaptive capacity to react to the effects of climate change, and the small island developing states, the least developed countries, which rely on the ocean in terms of food security, don't have the knowledge, are not producing the scientific output, and cannot adapt to the challenges we will face in the future. So capacity building is one important objective for this community of ocean action, and as well of IOC in general. And also to increase, this is the indicator lying behind the 14.8 target, and mostly lying behind this community of ocean action, is on how much countries actually invest in ocean science. And the mean value is less than 1% of their R&D investments. So it's really not at the forefront, even though it's so important, and it's really so, especially what we see here as well, that the ocean is an important climate regulator, and if we don't know what we will have in the future in the ocean, if we don't have better predictive capacity, we will not be able to also adapt and also to mitigate. So this 1% of investment in research and development for ocean science definitely has to increase to reflect the importance. Also connecting it to another SDG, to gender equality, so far ocean researchers are only 40% are women, which is still 10% better than in other natural science, but we are far away from equality or equity. And sadly, in a lot of countries where we have more than 50%, it's just because scientists just don't earn a lot of money. It's not well recognized the importance of science for society and for community, and I think we have to also, with this increase of scientific knowledge in the ocean science community and sphere, we have to close this circle from scientific knowledge to really creating the public awareness, moving to policy action, and then really having a better knowledge and understanding about our ocean and about it affects ocean and human health. So based on this, as well as Peter Thomson just said, we are now preparing for the UN decade for ocean science or sustainable development, and I'm inviting you all, and as well the community of ocean action will be a key partner in the preparatory phase, really to identify the key scientific needs to fulfill the mission of a UN decade of ocean science for sustainable development, that we have a better predictable ocean, that we have a safe ocean, that we will have a healthy and resilient ocean, to really be able to move to the next century with a good feeling, and not with, maybe my kid won't really experience a coral anymore or a mangrove.
Thank you very much, Kirsten. Yeah, I can't overemphasize the importance of that decade, and I've seen the work that's being done now by IOC and those that are advising them, and I can tell you this will indeed be the giant leap forward in terms of mankind's knowledge about the ocean. And we need that knowledge because we're going to have to make some very hard decisions about things pertaining to the ocean. Why? Because of the effects of climate change. There are things going on out there which are not going to change for 100 years, because it's like the battleship, which you start turning now and it doesn't actually turn around until you're way off in the future. So that decade of ocean science is going to be critical to us making the right decisions when those hard decisions have to be made. I'm now going to ask for observations on what we've been discussing from a friend of mine, Mr. Masanori Kobayashi, who's the Senior Research Fellow at the Ocean Policy Research Institute of the Sasakawa Peace Foundation in Japan. We see each other probably every week because he seems to go to the same meetings as me in Nairobi, Bangkok, and anyway, nice to see you again. And so I'm going to give you as much time as you want, and because I have to say farewell at this stage, and I'm handing over to my colleague from DESA who's going to moderate after I step off, because there's going to be some Q&A, but they haven't worked out how to clone me yet, and I'm supposed to be speaking at another event just over here. So you have the floor. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much. I'm Mr. Thomson, and I was fortunate to follow him in Bangkok, and I missed him in Sharm el Sheikh, but then I met him in Nairobi, and I came back here to see him again in Katowice. Thank you very much. And as I have heard to the panelists, it's been very impressive to listen to all the commitments made, and I think the commitment, as the Susan mentioned, they're all geared toward providing a solution to the problems, and I think this is very important. And Emmanuel mentioned this size and the values of the commitment really vary extensively from the large one to the small one. The question now we've been asking is how we can really measure the impact of these actions on the ocean and marine environmental resources, and how can we really report for the proper review and improve the actions we will take for the future. And this is probably the task that we have to consider in the coming processes that leads to the UN Second Ocean Conference in the year 2020. I also think that the task, the mangroves, corals, all variety of the areas we have been discussing, and the question is how we really promote these intersectoral coordinations. That we have a synergies, as Susan mentioned, there can be trade-off, and that kind of risk management we have to undertake that provide a better solution at the right time for the communities. We also think that the capacity development, as Carsten mentioned, we have to mobilize stakeholders for effective capacity buildings, but the oceans, as it goes beyond the national boundaries, interlinkages between the countries, how can we really promote this sub-regional or ecosystem-based or transboundary capacity buildings? This may be one of the questions. And one thing I want to emphasize is this linkages between ocean, climate, and people. I think we've been discussing, I just put together some of the slides, but these slides all show the people struggling in the changing environment due to the climate change. And this interlinkages between climate, ocean, and the humans. I think this may be a core message as well. And our task may be also to tailor the messages for respective forum. We are here for climate change. So maybe we have to tailor the messages of the community of the ocean actions that are relevant to the people who are negotiating climate policies. So this communication strategies of the communities of ocean actions in better making impact on the different policy arenas, I think that would be probably important. I guess I put some of the slide. Can you go to the next one? here we've been interviewing people, and Majuro here, the people are saying that they have been affected by the heavy rainstorms that they have never experienced. But the question is that they really don't know how to access the fund, how we can really bring the solutions they know that they have to do. And this is a Paro's slide. They have the jellyfish where people can swim, but because of the drought, the acidity increased and the jellyfish disappeared. They used to have 30,000 revenues of the sales of the tourist permit that are gone because of the disappearance of the jellyfish. They don't know who they can blame and who they can really get the compensations for the lost revenue of the sales of the tourist permit. So we try to analyze the key factors, and we also try to, can you go to the next one? The leakages with the blue economy, the local people, they need some more incentives to do more actions. So conservation alone doesn't really involve the stakeholders. So how can we really integrate these incentives into the actions that we try to address? So we put together some of the slides, science, policy, and the stakeholder interface that our institute is trying to address, and hope that we can make a valuable contribution to the work of the communities of Ocean Action. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We have about 10 minutes to go, so any questions and answers? Raise your hands.
Well, thank you very much to the panelists. My question, how can we improve the collaboration between the communities? Because what we know is that one voluntary commitment can be linked to more than one community, and how we sort of, in terms of showing progress. I mean, here we talk a lot about avoiding double accounting in terms of carbon emissions. So how, as all of us together, how can we move forward in really showing a clear picture in 2020 of what happened or where still gaps are?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Any? Sorry. Maybe we'll take one more question. Yeah.
So last year at the Ocean Conference, there was a great deal of commitments made by the business community. And I'm wondering, how are those commitments being tracked? So we routed quite a few through the UN Foundation and the UN Global Compact.
Any additional points? Maybe we'll take those two questions first. Okay.
Just to, no, I have to. Sorry. Just to answer the first question, maybe, sorry. I think we have to do a proper analysis, like we did with the commitment so far, where we have the biggest overlap, have joint events, joint webinars, then of those where we have between the communities of Ocean Action for scientific cooperation and maybe mangroves or ocean acidification, if there's a big overlap, that we just have one focus, like really on this intersection between those two webinars, and also yeah, just to start the communication. In the end, the communities of our Ocean Action are just as good as the members are, and as much communication we also receive back as an institution. But of course, we have to facilitate that and to enforce that a little bit more. Regarding the tracking, if I leave that for the other one.
Just building on this, yeah, it's critical that we need to work together, and we have already started with coastal ecosystem management and will be joining the workshop. But other than also, if we just put everyone together, it might be difficult to coordinate, and then it will become responsibility of maybe everyone and then none. So having little something manageable responsible for 2 institutions is also one good step, but definitely when it would come to implementation, we need to work together. But again, then constituencies for implementation are different also in some cases. You know, there is a marine pollution department maybe in some countries, and the forest department, which is different, might be responsible for restoration of mangroves. So maybe we can come up with a criteria, but bottom line is we do need to work together and supplement each other rather than duplication of the efforts.
So first, Dorothy, you're very right. There's a lot of double accounting and triple accounting in the commitments, and it's quite difficult sometimes for the community of action leaders to just disentangle those, because you can tick as many boxes as you want when you put a commitment. So how does one track that? And that actually goes as well to the second question. How does one track that? We all have day jobs, and that do not entail calling on people saying, hey, you said you were going to put 2 million, have you put them or not? So I think that among the community of action leaders, there's a discussion as to, do we focus on the biggest commitments? Is that a good idea? Do we focus on examples of commitments and track those? Do we, through that process, then encourage those that have made the commitments to demonstrate that they are putting the money where the mouth was? We don't entirely know exactly what is the best mechanism. My preference, and that is purely my preference, is that one has to chase those that you think are going to make the biggest difference for your specific community of action. Chase those ones, and in so doing, and in demonstrating what they're achieving, encourage the others that are at the wake to come forward. And so when it comes to the next UN Oceans Conference, they would stand up and say, I made that commitment, this is what has happened to it. Because otherwise we become just accountants, in chasing commitments, and that's not really going to help the case of the oceans at all.
I was just going to say that I'm sure that UNDESA will note the commitments that were made by private sector, and just to let you know that private sector, I think most of their commitments are spread across the 9 communities of ocean action. So if that's a task that you'd like to take on, let us know. But as Thorsten just said, it's something that we're still working through, so we're very open to engagement from members of our community of ocean actions.
Yeah, and I would just add, I don't think we need to just track the private sector commitments. I think we need to track all the commitments. But I agree, it is challenging, and I think maybe that's something analysis UNDESA could do, is help with some of that double accounting. I also think it would be interesting in the conference to think about where those overlaps of solutions are. So I mentioned waste management, but another one, for example, might be gear marking. When you talk about lost or abandoned fishing gear, it's a plastic problem. It's one of the biggest plastic problems, maybe much bigger than we thought it was. It creates microfibers. It also takes out a lot of fish because it keeps fishing after it's lost. So, I think there's maybe some interesting solution sets that we could examine within the conference and help to bring some of this together. So, just an idea.
Thank you. I think tracking commitments are a very cross-cutting thing, not just sort of this area, and across all the SDGs. So we take it very seriously on this one and take it back. Any more questions? No? If not, then I think I will invite 30 seconds from each of you to conclude before we conclude. Master, you want to start? Maybe a little this side.
Okay, so I'm very pleased to be part of this, and I hope that the community of the ocean actions can really make a better and a louder and more future-oriented voices to the different audience and the stakeholders. And I hope that when we meet next time, we can have better stories to report to the colleagues. Thank you.
Yes, I hope that in 2020 we will have, really with the communities of ocean action, provided a space for communication and collaboration among sectors, because I think that's the beauty of those communities of ocean action, that not scientists talking to scientists, know that scientists talk to industry, to the governments, and that we provide the space to move from the food chain in the knowledge chain, that we have the knowledge, that we have the action, and that we see the change, at least in what countries want to achieve.
Thank you. I think we need to have a business plan for implementation, because if UNDESA is coordinating all, and the implementation would also be left, all. So it may be, as colleague over here said, could be just accounting thing. If we can put together and then have a business plan for the implementation, I think that's the key, and we are already we are doing to have our forces behind that to take forward the action, but it would need not the business as usual, because that will just bring us maybe more commitments, but action on ground would need a different thinking.
So I would love to see in 2020 that this is just the beginning of something that becomes robust and integrated into international negotiations. So it's integrated on an international level, but also on the ground. And it's something that we, these voluntary commitments are showing the actual implementation of SDG 14, but I'm hoping that this becomes just the beginning of actual implementation and also funding mechanisms for this implementation.
Thank you. Perhaps to bring something slightly different, I think that one element that is important for the community of action leaders is actually to guide those that are making the commitments as to what they could do, because very often the commitments, not very often, sometimes the commitments are very generic. They essentially encapsulate a wish, a desire to help, but not really knowing how to help. So, for example, tomorrow in the Ocean Days, I will be introducing one of FAO's products of the year, which is what I call the IPCC for fisheries, which is a report on the impacts of climate change on fish and fisheries, country by country, region by region, with quantified estimates of impacts for inland fisheries as well as marine fisheries and aquaculture, and adaptations and mitigations. And the thing is, it's our responsibility to bring products that countries can then readily use and say, well, now I know what to do. Now I know how to use this money that I want to invest. Because many countries and many institutions do not really know what difference they could make if they knew what to do.
And I guess the last thing I would add, even though it complicates the accounting question, is I would love to see some tie back to the human dimensions. And so when we think about the things that we've done within these communities, how does that actually relate back to human development, economic development, protection of vulnerable populations? So I think we all know that that's very important and that the ocean contributes to that. I think making that more explicit in some of the ways that we report our results would be great.
Please join me giving a big hand to the panelists. Thank you very much. This ends the sessions, and we look forward to seeing you again this week and next. Thank you. Bye-bye.